Fountain Street Church, happy Sunday. Later on today, later this afternoon, in fact, I am privileged to be facilitating a forum, nationwide forum for clergy folk from around the country on the topic of psychedelics and ministry. And this topic, specifically the topic of psychedelic care, is something that's endlessly fascinating to me. I'm doing this extracurricular with these ministers personally for two important reasons. The first reason is that I am personally convinced that these medicines, and here I'm talking about the psychedelic molecules from different plants and funguses, can save lives. The peer-reviewed data is showing incredible promise, and in two very specific areas that are important to me. So the first is that this is a treatment protocol to help us curb the opiate addiction epidemic in America. The opioid crisis is like a tidal wave of despair. It's completely overwhelming many of our rural communities, especially here in the Midwest, here in Michigan. These are communities that are often forgotten about. These are rural communities that are now preparing to lose their hospitals, what little medical care they had as Donald Trump's new spending bill goes into effect and shuts down hospitals across the country. Addiction to opiates destroys untold thousands of lives. And some of these medicines, specifically ibogaine, a West African plant, they're already in use, and they're already available for use to millionaires and billionaires, to wealthy people around the world. There are overseas clinics in other countries where people avail themselves of these medicines. The only reason that the working class people don't have access to them is because the government is still throwing away billions of dollars on the so-called war on drugs. That's it. It's really just a war on minorities, poor people. The second reason, and I've talked about this with you before, but it's because they've shown a great deal of promise in mitigating some of the worst effects of post-traumatic stress disorder. This, especially for military veterans. These are mostly working class Americans who were often very young when they got sold on joining the military. They return from America's wars of adventure and empire, often needing a lot of help. And they find that their government was perfectly willing to put them in harm's way on behalf of private profit and empire, but then they abandon them when they get home. So the denomination, the church people that I'm working with specifically are called the United Church of Christ. Then I chose them on purpose because they are a denomination that often goes first to jump in the pool, okay? All the way back to the 18th century. These are the first people that ordained African Americans to ministry in the mainline church and published their books. The first to ordain women in America to ministry. The first Christians that supported public radio and public education. Later they supported the Americans with Disabilities Act when the rest of the churches were opposed to it. And they were the first to ordain openly gay people to ministry and then support same-gender marriage. These are the people who always do stuff first. Right? And then the rest of the Christians come along after about 20 years, 30 years, they come along. So these people in this denomination, the UCC, they've shown that they're opposed to the war on drugs and the militarization of the police. They support access to health care as a human right and public good. So I figure there's a shot that they might take a holy risk and be the first to support decriminalizing psychedelics. We can get to work saving lives. All right. People in this country are gasping for breath. They're gasping for breath. People are being crushed beneath the weight of despair. Now, I chose today's reading, this translation of the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth, because it is like a plea to the numinous. It's crying out to something larger than ourselves. It's a collective spirit of life. This new gospel that Hicks has written, translated, created, titled simply Teacher's Teachings. It landed on my desk about a month ago, and it's beautiful because it strips away so much of these unnecessary translation errors and biases. Hicks has been fearless in this work. And most especially, the way that the gospel is gendered into English in weird and unnecessary ways. It restores mystery to the text. And I've been reading it over and over again. It is complex and it is mystical. It doesn't try to make things easy, but in it is this plea from the voices of the teacher to something larger. Jesus is speaking to the source of being and trying to teach the disciples how to talk to the mystery. You are the clarity and the calm of the solitary. You see us as choosers, sees chosen, and you breathe into us the breath for which we gasp. I'm confident in these psychedelic medicines because I have gasped for breath. And I'm confident in the practices of people that are much more ancient and wise than we are. So I free range my chickens. It's the way they did it for hundreds of years. It turns out it's the best way to do it. Who'd have thought? And I put cedar chips in my linen closet because I read about that in a book from the 19th century, and it works. And I put white vinegar in my dishwasher. All right, this is folk wisdom, and it works and it heals people. And these medicines, these psychedelic compounds are very ancient things. They've been with us for a long time. It's counterintuitive, but it works. When humans are experiencing isolation and despair, access to safe psychedelic treatments under the care of somebody with training could give them relief and hope and healing. Now, I don't need to know the science behind all of this because I am not a scientist. I'm more of a technician. But I am a curious person. So I had an opportunity to speak with a scientist about this stuff and about these psychedelic medicines. And she was a brain doctor, and she told me not to say that. It is not accurate. She's a nuclear radiologist, let's say. Takes pictures of the brain, all right? And I asked her to explain this stuff to me as though I was a church pastor from West Michigan. And so you can imagine. And she told me this beautiful story that I'm going to tell to you. She said, imagine that the human brain is the source of a river, like a mountain, dotted with hundreds of springs and fountains and sources of water. And water from within the earth is bubbling up across the landscape. And over time, over the century, this water from within the earth is going to cut hundreds or even thousands of little streams and rivulets and creeks and brooks all along the side of the mountain. And all that water's flowing down into the river in the valley below. And these little creeks and streams, those are our thought patterns. It's the way that we think, the patterns, the way we look at the world. And it's the same with a mountainside. As time passes, the creeks and streams, they start to cut deeper and deeper into the rocks, so they become more permanent, more set in their ways, until you can draw a map of them. Or take a photograph with a photon scanner, right? So we can give them names to these creeks and brooks, and they're very stable. Our neural pathways are carved into our mind. Now, sometimes they're good things, right? I can play the violin with almost while I'm doing my shopping list in my head. I don't have to think about it. It's a little canyon. Playing the violin is cut so deep into my brain that I can do it in my sleep. Many of you work in the skilled trades, right? Your mind, your hands, your muscle memory can hang a sheet of drywall or wire up a junction box or program a computer without really having to think about it too hard. The water just flows, right? But some of these creeks are very bad for us. They're bad for us. Depression is a big one. It gets cut into that mountainside. My God, it is treacherous and deep. And the water comes up from the earth and plunges into that canyon from all directions. Our trauma, experiences from our lives that take hold of us at the strangest times. We're going through our daily activities, and our thoughts are bubbling up to the surface, and they plunge into this creek that was cut into the stones of our soul years ago. And we can't seem to get the water back on course where we want it. So this doctor said that it appears that these medicines, like psilocybin was the one we were talking about specifically, the active component in these mushrooms, it appears that they flood the brain with this chemical that's called serotonin, and it is as if all the fountains and springs and wells, they open up at full blast, and the water flows so powerfully, so prodigiously, that it floods the mountainside, and it overflows these old pathways, and the creeks and streams are completely washed out and flooded, and for just a moment, even the ego itself is overwhelmed, and we become like an ocean, an endless sea of thought and consciousness. And so they can overwhelm the pathways that are pulling us into the gravitational orbit of the thoughts that may be killing us. And for some people, in that moment, that simple moment is spent looking at the forest instead of the trees. This can be life-saving. The word that has come into currency over the last couple decades for these compounds, for these molecules because there's literally hundreds of them. The word is entheogens. Entheogen it's from the Greek. It means roughly to generate divinity within us, or to find the divine within, to find the inner holiness. It's bigger. It also refers to our practices: meditation, yoga, prayer disciplines, silence. Healing is not dependent on the compound. Okay. But why connect this to the church? Why? Why not just lobby the pharmaceutical companies? What's this got to do with the church? And what's this got to do with Jesus? I mean, this seems like pretty new agey stuff. Yeah? Why did I say, well, leave the Jesus people alone? They have enough on their plate to deal with. They got Christian nationalists and end-timers and capitalism. They do not need you bothering them about magic mushrooms. I can't. There's an intersection between the teachings and way of Jesus and the impact of this holy flood, these medicines. Now, first of all, religions have been incorporating entheogens into their practices since before we had language to describe it. Cannabis, it's marijuana, it shows up in the Old Testament, right? There's pretty serious evidence that Christians themselves employed this stuff in their mystical practices. But I think that Jesus was trying to unlock something in his disciples and the people he was teaching that is connected to these medicines. He's trying to help them know something that is larger than themselves, or perhaps remember something that they've forgotten. Every time they ask him about this, he redirects them toward empathy. Every time they ask him about what God is like, he takes and redirects them toward something larger than themselves. They ask him how to pray, and he teaches them that to pray to forgive those who've harmed them. They ask him how to obey religious rules, and he tells them to help their neighbor. And then they ask him, what happens after you die? And he very carefully tells them that if they are seriously concerned about that, well, they need to focus on feeding the hungry, giving water to the thirsty, welcoming strangers, clothing the naked, caring for the sick, and visiting people in prison. Now, today, while they're alive. This is the work of empathy. And the barriers to this, the stumbling blocks, come from inside. They come from our own ego, they come from our past traumas, and they come from our depression and cynicism that have been cut into our minds like canyons. I can't ask a church to show radical hospitality to the stranger if the members of that church are barely keeping their heads above water. How can I love them? How can I love them into loving the unhoused or the poor and oppressed if they are unable to love each other or themselves? And how can I ask them to open their hearts to a flood of joy and grace and wonder that comes from beloved community if they are locked in a battle with an opponent that lives in their own mind? They're caught in a whirlwind of noise and anxiety from their own ego, a fear of scarcity, a fear of ridicule or humiliation or being cringe or whatever, fear of strangers, or fear of being loved. There was a great psychologist in the 20th century named Lawrence Kohlberg who wrote about our moral development, the stages of moral growth. This is what humans travel through as they begin to grow. And the first stage, the one that we start out with, the lowest level he calls it pre-conventional morality. It's a fear of punishment and a desire for obedience. If the ref didn't see it, it wasn't a foul sort of stuff. If I want something, it's fine for me to have it as long as I can get it without being punished. We're supposed to grow out of that stuff around age 7 or 8. Some people never grow out of it. Some of them become president. We got to work on that. But the next phase is conventional morality. This is the middle, the concern for how others perceive us. I want to do the right thing so others perceive me to be a good person. And so I think there ought to be law and order. I think it's good to have rules. This is where 30 to 40% of us end up. Conventional morality. It's what we expect from high school students. And then the third and final stage, the highest phase, he calls it post-conventional morality. It says that society has rights. And there are universal human rights. There's something larger than myself. And so I love humanity. And I'm filled with joy when I see humanity thriving and doing well. And I will personally sacrifice for the well-being of strangers. Not because I'm afraid of being punished, and not because I want to look good in front of people, but out of the deep joy that I get from the well-being of humankind. And they estimate that maybe 10 to 20% of us in America make it. 10 to 20% make it to that top level. That ain't going to cut it. Those are rookie numbers. Pump those numbers up, folks. You got to get there. Spiritual practices that orient us toward empathy can lead us to the highest levels of moral development. Empathy is a doorway that we've got to walk through. And I think these psychedelic medicines can be one key that can maybe unlock that door. And is it better up there? Is it better to live up there? Believing in humanity for the sake of the beauty of humanity, to be subject to fear for the well-being of all life, given a perspective that is so great and wondrous that it sees all humans as inherently precious and holy. And I think that this perspective is what Jesus of Nazareth is referring to as the kingdom of heaven. In Islam, it is known as Dar al-Salam. It is the house of peace. In Buddhism, it is the Shanti. And it is noble. In Judaism, the Shekinah. This is the place we can reach together, and we can only get there together. If you are gasping for breath, looking for something greater than yourself, empathy is a discipline of push and pull, of grasping and surrendering. And it is something that ego cannot give us. Reverend Fred Wooden said, grow your soul, right? Grow your soul. Grow your soul. Despite the very real pain that is boiling over in this country today, the very real fascism that is threatening the most vulnerable people, I still believe that we are on the cusp of something that is great and glorious. It is a shift in consciousness. The whole mass of humanity is grasping and reaching for something. It is a painful reach. It is just there. Beloved, you are mere steps from this summit. Light is about to spill over a horizon. So reach just a few more inches with me. Reach out and with your other hand, take hold of the hand of that miracle that is beside you, that person that is beside you, and we can take hold of this thing together. And then when you got it, you have to share it. You have to share it, because that's what gives light to the whole world. Amen. Amen.